tobacco last time. Smokeless tobacco no better than smoking cigars or pipes or cigarettes or whatever the hell you want to smoke. Smokeless tobacco, dip of stuff in between your cheek and gum gives you a lot of nicotine. Smokeless tobacco can be as addicting as smoking because tobacco and smokeless tobacco forms contain more nicotine than smoked tobacco. Now you may ask yourself, do they know how much nicotine is in their Copenhagen? The answer is yes. They know exactly how much there is in there. And what they're trying to do is sell more cans of Copenhagen. That's what they're trying to do. So the more addicted you are, the more likely you're going to buy that second can of Copenhagen. When I lived up in Montana, if you wore a pair of jeans and you were a guy, then you had a ring that showed that you had Copenhagen in your pocket. Everybody did. It was the dumbest thing in the world. It was always the right pocket. That's where they kept their Copenhagen. And if you were cool, which I never was, but if you were, I didn't even wear jeans. If you were cool, you had that circle in your pants, in your jeans. As cool as that is, because bull riders, yeah, they all dip snuff. Everybody knows that. They can't get on a bull without a dip in their mouths. I had a good friend. He was a Blackfeet guy. He was trying to get off the stuff, and he couldn't. He just couldn't do it. He was doing all kinds of stuff. He was chewing the gum. He was taking Chantix. There were drops that he was taking, and he couldn't get off the stuff. It's really a mess. He was a contractor, nice guy. And unfortunately, he was developing all kinds of interesting problems with his gums, and that was something that he needed to look into. And of course, his wife wanted him to stop, but he couldn't. People use more smokeless tobacco when they use than they do when they smoke cigarettes. So you get a lot more nicotine. You get a lot more tars and whatnot. The other problem with smokeless tobacco is the way that they get you hooked is that it has fiberglass in it. And the fiberglass cuts your gum and it gets into your system a lot faster that way. The smokeless tobacco has a higher pH, allowing it to pass into the capillaries more readily, so it gets into your system faster. One dip of smokeless tobacco delivers the same amount of nicotine as 3 to 4 cigarettes. That's a pretty good buzz. At least the dipper is less likely to get lung cancer, of course. They're not going to get lung cancer. They're going to get other problems. Their gums are always inflamed. They have all kinds of interesting dental problems. They get oral cancer, pharyngeal cancer, esophageal cancer, cheek cancer, and gum cancer, which is never attractive. My next door neighbor developed, he chewed tobacco. He didn't dip, but he chewed tobacco, and he developed cancer of the salivary glands. And they had to take all of them out. When they did, they had to fuse his neck, and now he's permanently like this, and half of his jaw is gone. It's kind of attractive. He's a judge, which is so every time you see him, he's got his chin on his chest because his neck muscles are gone. And of course, he's got half of his face, and he can only talk with half of his mouth. It's his left side. I can't do it. Anyway, he only talks with the right side of his mouth, and he's a judge. And he developed cancer by the time he was in his 40s from chewing tobacco, which was just the dumbest thing in the world. Benefits of quitting smoking. 20 minutes after quitting, your blood pressure and pulse rate drop, and your feet and your hands warm up to normal temperatures. People that smoke don't realize that they have such cold hands and feet. They think this is a normal way. Everybody has cold hands and feet, but the reality is, of course, it's a vasoconstrictor, and that's the first thing that happens, is that your feet and hands get cold. Within 8 hours, the carbon monoxide level in the blood, in your blood drops, and oxygen levels increase. Both of them increase almost to normal. When I worked in the laboratory, of course, people would come in with carbon monoxide poisoning. We would have to use something as our control. And what we used as our control was a guy who was a chain smoker in our department. And we draw his blood and use him as a positive control because he always had carbon monoxide in his system. This guy would wake up 2 or 3 times a night to smoke cigarettes. He kept a very high, relatively high level of nicotine in his system, which of course adds carbon monoxide to your blood. So we used him as our positive control, and they used me as the negative control because I'm a runner. Within 24 hours, the risk of sudden heart attack decreases. I keep bragging about my friend that died of a heart attack. He was a smoker. I thought he had quit. He sent me a picture one time of this fish that he caught, and he had a cigarette dangling out of the corner of his mouth. And I asked him, I thought you said you quit. And he said, I can't. And he died. It's like 6 months later, he's dead as a doornail. Doornails are dead anyway. But he died. And like I said, he had exactly the same heart attack that I did. It was exactly the same artery in his heart. He had less occlusion than I did, and he died. He never regained consciousness after his heart attack. And of course, here I am. I'm yelling at the doctor and whatnot. When I had my heart attack, he just lost consciousness and he was dead. Why? Because his blood vessels were used to being vasoconstricted, and when he had his heart attack, they just stopped, and he was gone. Within 48 hours, the nerve endings adjust to the absence of nicotine while the sense of taste and smell return. And this is one of the reasons why they eat more after they stop smoking, because now all of a sudden they can taste things. Everything tastes like an ashtray when you are a smoker. Within 1 week, breathing improves and constricted blood vessels begin to relax. And all this is good news. Within 2 to 12 weeks, circulation improves, lung function increases up to 30%, and the complexion begins looking healthy again. One of the things that happens to you if you are a smoker is you look dead. Your face starts turning blue or pale, whatever. If you're a blonde-headed or red-headed lady, then you can really see the difference between smoking and non-smoking. Within 1 to 9 months, fatigue, coughing, sinus congestion, and shortness of breath decreases, and lungs increase their ability to handle mucus. That's one of the problems if you've ever been around a smoker. If you've ever been around them in the morning, they have what they call smoker's cough, where they can't move the mucus out of their system. So first thing in the morning, after they haven't had a cigarette for an extended length of time, for 6 or 8 hours, they'll start coughing and coughing up all the mucus that they should have been coughing up all day long.
There's somebody coughing.
Oh, somebody's coughing out there. I'm about to cough myself. Anyway, they can't handle mucus, and they cough up this nasty, nasty black stuff that has tar in it, which is, of course, what is in cigarettes. Within 1 year, the risk of coronary heart disease has been cut in half. But of course, the risk of coronary heart disease is very, very high if you are a smoker. So being cut in half doesn't mean that the risk is gone. Within 5 years, the heart disease rate has become that of a non-smoker. It takes 5 years for your heart to recover. Within 10 years, the lung cancer rate drops to just about above that of a non-smoker. 10 years, if you live that long. Within 10 to 15 years, the disease rate has returned to that of a non-smoker. The damage you have done is still there. Whatever damage you did. Luke Perry may have stopped snorting cocaine when he was in his 30s. But the damage he did killed him last week. It's just the way it works. I hate to tell you this, but when you when you damage yourself, when you smoke, when you take drugs, the damage that you do is permanent. There is a degree of recovery if you stop smoking. There is a degree of recovery if you stop snorting cocaine. Remember, this is what happened with Robin Williams. Stopped snorting cocaine. He was clean for 17 years, fell off the wagon, went back to rehab, found out that he had rapid onset Alzheimer's disease, and he committed suicide. The damage that he did is permanent. There's just nothing you can do about it. We can't go in there and fix this stuff. So potentially that's why Luke Perry expired at age 52 of a stroke. It's very rare. People are rationalizing right now on the internet. I was trying to find out what his drug abuse history was yesterday, but there's all that's in there is all that stuff about him dying. There's one website that I went to. They were trying to rationalize the fact that he had a stroke at 52. We'll find out later. After this whole thing's over with, everybody wears a halo when they die. But eventually, of course, we'll be able to find out what his drug history is. Potentially, we should be able to find out what his drug history was now, but of course, if you Google it, anything, all you're going to find is the fact that he died. Anyway, there you go. I know I should feel sorry for him. I mean, he was gorgeous. He was a very attractive man. I guess that means something, but I don't feel sorry for people that kill themselves. I should. No, I don't. I just don't. That's too much time in the emergency room. And the morgue. Oh shit, another body I gotta pick up. Oh well. I know, it's ugly. So this chapter is about opiates and opioids. As I told you before, 162 people die every day from drug interaction. 115 of those are from opiates or opioids. They have a problem with fentanyl right now. We have a new drug on the market that's 1,000 times stronger than morphine. For some reason, I haven't figured out why they think they need this stuff. This stuff's called Dasuya. It comes out of China. And of course, that's the problem with fentanyl. We have no control over the fentanyl. It's coming in from China. Is it coming in legally? Yeah, it's coming in legally. They're not smuggling it across the border. So most of the stuff that's killing our kids or our adults, whoever we have shooting up with this stuff, it's legal. The stuff coming across the border, we have crystal meth coming across the border, we have cocaine coming across the border, but the opiates and opioids are already here. And the problem is that the doctors are overprescribing, is what the problem is. Depressants depress the activity in the central nervous system. They sedate, they cause muscles to relax, they may depress inhibitions, emotions, impulses. I was just thinking about this morning. My wife's going off of Effexor. Effexor is an anti-anxiety medication. It's also an antidepressant. And she went on it when I went down to South America. I went down to South America on a Fulbright trip, and she thought I was not going to come back. As it turned out, we had some problems in Guatemala, and we kind of almost just about didn't come back, so that was kind of close. We went to Tikal, which is over by Belize, and we were walking around the place, and we had no problems at all. The next group that came in, they kidnapped him, and they held him. Of course, they were looking for select types of individuals. They were looking for military people. Of course, if you're military, they assume that you're CIA or something. Anyway, if they'd seized me, they would probably I got a military ID. Yeah, I'm in trouble. Anyway, she was kind of right. So she was really spooked when we went down to South America, and I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize it until I came back. She went on Effexor at that point, and it's a depressant or antidepressant, and it's an anti-anxiety medication. One of the things that it did that I didn't realize was that it was inhibiting her emotions. It was slowing them. It was keeping her from having emotional reactions to things. I had always seen her as a very tough lady, But she, all of a sudden, she wasn't nearly as affectionate. Well, affectionate doesn't sound right. She wasn't nearly as effusive as she was before. And it's been that way since 2003. Now that she's going off of it, she's starting to cry when she watches movies. So, and you don't realize this kind of stuff is going on because her personality really didn't change that much. But what did change was the fact that she wasn't having emotional reactions to things, and I didn't really recognize it. Depressants mimic the naturally inhibitory neurotransmitters, endorphins, enkephalins, and gamma-aminobutyric acids, or GABA, so they inhibit things, slow things down, stop pain. Three major classes of downers. Opiates, opioids is one class, sedative hypnotics is another, and alcohol is the third class of depressants. There are four minor classes of depressants: skeletal muscle relaxants, antihistamines, over-the-counter depressants, and look-alike depressants. We're not going to talk about look-alike depressants because we don't really use them anymore. There are over-the-counter depressants, and of course we all know about the antihistamines that are in most of our cold capsules, and then the skeletal muscle relaxants, Librium, Robaxin, those types of medications. We'll be talking about all four of these, or all of these types. Opiates, opioids include opium, of course. Morphine was the next substance that was discovered. When they discovered morphine, they discovered that there was also codeine in there. Vicodin and OxyContin are both semi-synthetics. Methadone is totally synthetic. Heroin is a natural opiate. Heroin. Originally, it was developed as a painkiller, also as a cough suppressant. One of the really serious problems that the humans of the world had in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries is tuberculosis. People coughed themselves to death. It was a bacteria that they couldn't get rid of, and people would it was a wasting disease, and these people would just cough and cough until they finally died. It's fairly contagious, relatively highly contagious, so we've been looking for a cough suppressant for an extended length of time. The idea was that if we can stop the cough, then we can keep them from dying, and of course that is kind of true, but it's also not all that true. People can live for years with tuberculosis, or they can die within weeks of contracting tuberculosis. Another problem that kills people, this was the number one killer about 30 or 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, was diarrhea. And it was killing the kids. The kids were catching a case of diarrhea. We couldn't stop it, so the kids were dehydrating themselves to death. And this was happening all over the world. Dysentery is out there. All kinds of interesting diarrheic diseases. So this was a really serious problem that we needed to take care of. So we've always looked for a cough suppressant, and we've always looked for a diarrhea treatment. This is, despite the fact it has to do with feces, this is one of the problems that has wiped out more people than anything else. Pneumonia is another problem, of course, that is the great equalizer. People would catch pneumonia and die. And this is just the way it was. The doctors had no way of stopping anything. So when they first invented, or when they first discovered the codeine and morphine, they thought, wow, this is the way that we're going to stop everything. Now, of course, we know that all it does is slow things down. It doesn't get rid of the bacteria, doesn't get rid of whatever the problem really is. In the case of tuberculosis, you've got the tuberculosis bacteria. In the case of dysentery, the dysenteries, there's a lot of different bacteria that causes the problem, including E. coli, which is out there. But of course, if you don't kill off the bacteria, you're not going to solve the problem. All you're going to do is slow down the process. Sedative hypnotics, synthetic chemicals developed to treat anxiety and insomnia. Naproxamate, Miltown, phenobarbital, Seconal, Doradin, methaqualone, popularly known as Quaaludes, flunitrazepam, Rohypnol, GHB, benzodiazepines, Xanax, and Valium. Rohypnol and GHB are both date rape drugs. If you give this to somebody, it knocks them out, kind of. They're still functional, and what men will do is they'll slip this stuff into women's drinks, and then they have their way with them. As horrible as that sounds. Another date rape drug is ketamine, Special K. They call it Special K. They use it as a date rape drug. As stupid as that is. Of course, the original date rape drug was alcohol. Alcohol is a natural byproduct of the fermentation process of plant sugars or starches. This is the oldest psychoactive substance used by humans. You get somebody drunk and then possibly you can, once again, they used it as a date rape drug. Alcohol is the world's second most destructive drug after tobacco. Tobacco kills 1/3 people in the United States every year. Skeletal muscle relaxants are synthetically developed central nervous system depressants that target the area of the brain responsible for muscle coordination and activity. Some of the drugs that are skeletal muscle relaxants: Soma, Paraffin Forte, Flexeril, Lioresal, and Robaxin, of course. You can add Librium to this group as well. When I was in the service, we had problems with women becoming, wives becoming irritated because their husbands were over in Vietnam, that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we did to them was give them anti-anxiety medications. And the anti-anxiety medication that we gave them was Valium. And the muscle relaxant that we gave them was Librium. And we used to get this stuff in 5-gallon buckets, the Valium and Librium. We were handing out so much of it, as stupid as that sounds. Antihistamines are found in cold and allergy medications to block the neurotransmitter histamine. Synthetic drugs are used to treat allergic reactions, of course. We talk about this, you see this on television all the time. We also use it to prevent ulcers or to prevent shock because the histamine creates a specific reaction in the body. So in order to stop the shock process, we'll give somebody a shot of antihistamine. If you go out in the woods and you're reacting to something, you've got a rash all over your body, you can take Benadryl and it goes away. It's an antihistamine. We give it to individuals for motion sickness, and we give it to individuals to prevent the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So how well does this work? Well, it works okay. I mean, it does the job. It doesn't do anything for the Parkinson's disease, but the symptoms aren't nearly as bad. The tremors, the fact they can't walk, sometimes they develop the ability to do that. Over-the-counter depressants, sleep aids or sedatives, Nitol, Sleepy's, Sominex, these are things you can buy at any drugstore. They do have active ingredients in it. One of them is scopolamine. Scopolamine, of course, if you have ever watched spy movies, that is the true serum. So be careful if you take this stuff. You may be divulging secrets that you didn't want to divulge. It has scopolamine, antihistamines, bromide derivatives, and it also certainly it has alcohol in it if you're taking the liquid stuff. Lookalike depressants, we rarely see these today. In the old days, of course, we used to see them, but not anymore. Big story on the internet. There are parents that are addicted to opiates, and they are raiding opiate fields, opium poppy fields. They're stealing the pods off of the flowers. As stupid as that sounds. Anyway, these parrots are taking them off and eating them because they're addicted to the opium. Opiates are products of the opium poppy, and this is what the opium poppy looks like. Opioids are synthetic versions of opiates, of course. Opiates come from the milky sap that oozes from the unripe seed pod of the flower, and that's what's going on here. They've made 3 cuts in it, and as you can see, it's leaking out. Now the trick is to catch this stuff before it drips on the ground. You don't want that to happen. So they'll stay out there all day and they'll watch these drops accumulate, and then they'll go and they'll scrape them off, and then they will manufacture them into opium, or well, they turn it into opium, and then they'll use a chemical formula and they'll change it to something else. Once you cut this thing, it oozes for about a week. It can be milked about 6 times in any given season. So that's how they do it. And they'll have whole fields of these things. Almost all the opium comes from Afghanistan. And of course that's where we are. We're soldiers in Afghanistan. We still have our soldiers in Afghanistan. We've been there since 2001. Afghanistan is a really mountainous area. It's very difficult to control. We're not the first people that have tried to control Afghanistan. The Russians tried to do it in 1980. The Brits tried to do it for a couple decades back in the 1800s. And the French tried to do it before that and got their butts kicked, as did the British and as did the Russians. And it looks like we may be pulling out. And if we pull out, it looks like the Taliban have about 60% control of the country right now. Opium produces over 25 alkaloids. The 2 most important are codeine and morphine. Codeine makes up about 0.7% to 2.5% of the opium exudate. Morphine makes up 10 to 20% of the opium exudate. There's a 3rd alkaloid that is a stimulant rather than a depressant, and that is thebaine. But I've never known anybody to do anything with thebaine, as weird as that is. So when we get the exudate, as we saw in the exudate, when we get this stuff, we can process it into 2 different sedatives. One of them is codeine, and the other one is morphine, is actually opium, but we can break it down into codeine and morphine. Semi-synthetic opiates are opiates that are refined in a select way to produce a psychoactive substance that is partially natural and partially synthetic. That's what we do with heroin. We're going to talk about where it first came from. Vicodin, of course, is hydrocodone. It's a semi-synthetic. Oxycodone or Percodan or OxyContin is another semi-synthetic, and the other one is Dilaudid or hydromorphine. Fully synthetic opiate drugs, methadone. One of them is methadone. Demerol. Demerol meperidine is one of the things that we give to individuals who are in a great deal of pain in the hospital. We put Darvon in Tylenol, and it's a fully synthetic opiate, actually, Darvon. Synthetic opioid antagonists, naltrexone and naloxone, and this is the stuff that we use to keep people from dying from an opiate overdose. We can actually use it for anything because it blocks the dopamine cycle in your brain. And once it does that, it stops the whole process. So, if somebody has overdosed on heroin, they have arrested in their brainstem, their medulla, they have arrested their ability to breathe and for their heart to beat. We can give them a shot of naloxone or naltrexone, and it will stop that. And of course, they'll start breathing again, hopefully. Opium poppies were first cultivated in ancient Mesopotamia. It then spread north to Greece and west Egypt, eventually making its way east into Asia. Opium was used in many medicines in the Old World, but its ills were seen even then when various writers wrote of its addictive properties. So we've known that opium is not a good substance, that people do become addicted to it. In the beginning, they used it as an additive. They ate it, they chewed it, or they mixed it with a liquid and they drank the substance. the early 1500s, opium regained popularity when the Swiss chemist Paracelsus began making a tincture. Anything that is a tincture is mixed with alcohol, and it's usually a powdered substance that's mixed with alcohol, and that's called a tincture. So you have a tincture of this or a tincture of that. It's just something that's mixed with alcohol, and the alcohol is used as an accelerant. They mixed it with opium powder, and they made a substance known as laudanum. And of course, they started using it for coughing and dysentery. They used it for diarrhea. They also used it for pain. They used it as for alcoholics. They would give it to alcoholics, and they did this with Edgar Allan Poe. He was an alcoholic. He was somebody that couldn't drink alcohol. He became non-functional when he drank alcohol. He had an adverse reaction to alcohol. So it's not like he got drunk and then had a big party. It didn't work that way. When he drank alcohol, which he was addicted to, if he drank alcohol, he just passed out. He was non-functional. So they gave him laudanum instead, which is tincture of opium, in order to cure him of his alcoholism. Opium continued to be used in medicinal mixtures for the next 3 centuries. Paregoric is tincture of opium with camphor. It was developed for the treatment of diarrhea. My mother had gallbladder disease, and she called the doctor and told him she had this violent diarrhea and that she needed to slow it down, so she asked him if he'd give her some paregoric. And of course he did. And slowed down her problem, and then they took her to the hospital, figured out she had gallbladder disease. They chopped her open with an axe, yanked out her gallbladder. My poor mother. Anyway, I can remember her calling the doctor and yelling at him to give her that she needed paregoric. And of course, it's still used today. My mother ordered it from the doctor. That's fun. She was a nurse, and she knew the doctor. And they used to yell at each other all the time. Opium smoking became popular in the 16th century. This means of drug introduction puts more of the active ingredients into the system faster, about 7 to 10 seconds. Because the psychoactive ingredients enter the bloodstream and brain faster, there is a greater sense of euphoria, well-being, and relaxation. And so we saw a lot of individuals smoking opium back in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They outlawed it in China because it was so debilitating that they outlawed it. And of course, in the 19th century, the English forced the Chinese to open their ports to opium. Why did they do that? Because they had all of this opium and they wanted tea, is what they wanted. So they forced the Chinese to take opium in trade for tea. Actually, they forced the Chinese to buy the opium with silver, and the Chinese would only sell their tea for silver bars. So that's what was going on. Before that, there were no ports open to the English in China, so they had to smuggle the tea out of China in order to get it. So the English decided that they would rather fight a war and force the Chinese to take the opium, and it was a bad deal for the Chinese. Modern methods of smoking heroin involves heating the substance in tin foil and inhaling the fumes through a straw. This is known as chasing the dragon, and this is what it looks like when somebody chases the dragon. This lady, and as you can see how red her nose is. And doggone it, she needs to wash her hair. she's cooking the opium, and she's breathing it through that straw. As cool as that is, of course you have to keep a fire underneath it in order to make it work. So she's chasing the dragon. She's a mess. 1805, the morphine alkaloid was first isolated from opium and was found to be 10 times stronger than opium and thus a more effective painkiller. We're always looking for a more effective painkiller. Don't worry, we've got one that's 1,000 times stronger than morphine. Dysuvia. The stuff's called Dysuvia. And I am not sure why we have something that's 1,000 times stronger than morphine. How much do you give somebody to make the pain go away? Maybe you can cut this with something like, I don't know, powdered sugar or something. I don't know. And you can still get your high. The problem is going to be how much are we putting in there and how much is everybody getting? And how, will we be killing people just like we are with fentanyl? Fentanyl, of course, is 100 times stronger than morphine. And that's what people are overdosing with in the United States right now. Morphine was first used in the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, and then during the American Civil War. They didn't naturally grow opium poppies in the South, but they started growing opium poppies so that they would have morphine for the troops. In 1832, the weaker alkaloid codeine was isolated from opium. It was found to only be twice as strong as a painkiller as opium was. Codeine was used to treat coughs and general neuralgia, so they gave it to people to make their muscle pains go away. In 1870, or joint pains. In 1874, a British chemist boiled morphine with acetic anhydride to create an opiate synthetic that was 5 to 8 times stronger than morphine. Bayer Pharmaceuticals in Germany bought the chemical and named it heroin. And the reason they named it heroin because it was heroic. It made the individual heroic if they took heroin. Bayer marketed it as a cough suppressant, a chest painkiller, and a treatment for tuberculosis and pneumonia. Once again, we're trying to treat tuberculosis. So initially, it was the brand new drug that was going to cure tuberculosis. It was also a drug for people that were having heart attacks. Why in the world would they have chest pain? Well, chest pain comes with a heart attack, and so they were treating people with people who were having heart attacks. When I had my heart attack, the first thing they wanted to do was give me morphine to stop the pain. And of course, morphine doesn't work on me, and I wouldn't let them give it to me, and it pissed them off because that wasn't part of the protocol. By God, they were supposed to give me morphine. I could have let them give me morphine, but it wouldn't have done anything to me. So I said, no, let's not juice me up with all this stuff that doesn't work. So they threw me in a helicopter and they flew me to Great Falls, Montana, which was 150 miles away. And when they landed, they took me right to surgery. And what did they shoot me up with? Morphine, of course. Did it knock me out? Hell no. They started cutting on me, and I was still awake. The dummies. Waved my hand at them shits. Sometimes you gotta call it dumb shit. You know? Even if he's a doctor and he's got a knife and he's ready to cut your leg open. Heart cath. What they do is they make an incision in your groin area, and they thread a tube through your femoral artery down into your heart. Now, your femoral artery is a relatively large artery. It runs up and down your leg, keeps your leg supplied with blood. It's a fairly large artery, but it's way down here. Well, it's all the way down into your leg, but they can catch it right here, and then they thread that thing all the way up your right side and down into your heart. Of course, your heart's on your left side, so it has to go all the way up here and all the way across and then down into your heart. I know that because, well, first of all, I've seen the surgery, and second of all, I woke up during the surgery. I could feel it. Oh my God. It had to hit me again. And what they hit me with, morphine and fentanyl, a bolus of morphine and fentanyl. The fentanyl is the only thing that worked. Fentanyl is a synthetic. It's a synthetic opiate, and it works. It worked that time anyway. Well, it didn't work good enough to keep me asleep. So what are we doing? Heroin crossed the blood-brain barrier more rapidly than morphine. The result was a more intense and rapid rush in euphoria. There aren't that many people that aren't sensitive to opiates and opioids. It's like 5% of the population, which sounds like a significant number of people, but the reality is it's not that many people. I'm not sensitive, but probably the rest of you guys are, so don't even worry about it. If you're in a lot of pain and they need to take you to surgery, they'll probably just knock you out with morphine. And the morphine not only takes the pain away, it makes you forget. You can't remember. You can't remember the pain. So we've got a rapid rush and euphoria. It's estimated that at the turn of the 20th century, there were between 250,000 and 1 million morphine and heroin addicts in the United States. Most of these individuals were Civil War veterans who had, they used to call it the soldier's disease, being a morphine addict. And so most of these individuals, of course that was in 1900, it was only 35 years after the war ended, so there were still a lot of soldiers that were still alive in the Civil War. Through the 1800s, patent medicines were produced that contained opiates. These patent medicines were used for such problems as tired blood. They gave it to babies, colicky babies, ones that cried all the time, for coughs, for diarrhea, and for toothaches. You could take a patent medicine to make the pain go away. They were used to quiet loud children and to aid in sleeping. So not only are they giving it to babies, but they're also giving it to kids with ADHD. Did it work? Sure. Stopped them right away. Knocked them right out. Did it help the babies? Yeah, they stopped crying. Don't worry, they stopped crying. Don't give them a second dosage, you'll kill them. Surprisingly, surveys showed that more than half the opium addicts were women with tired blood, or ones that had a little bit of a cough, or ones that had toothaches. It was women that were taking it. Made them feel better. The drudgeries of being a woman back at the turn of the 20th century was fairly high. You did all your washing by hand. You had to iron all the clothes. You had to glue everything. Whites turned yellow in water because the water wasn't soft, it was hard. So it turned yellow, so you had to glue everything to make it look white. So you not only had to wash it, but you also had to bleach it, and if you bleached it, it still turned yellow. So now you had to blue it. You had to put bluing in to make it look white. I'm getting the picture? I'm sorry?
Like a dye?
It's not really a dye. It was a light blue dye. You could call it a light blue dye, I guess. But it made white look whiter. Otherwise, white looked yellow.
Bruce, the hotel over in Chinle,
Chinle?
yeah, they have like a big old tanks. They put capsules in there for soft water. Is that almost like
Bluing?
almost like I think that's what they
I
learned.
don't think we
Because I
do.
know chili water is like yellow.
Is it really yellow?
I don't even do
They
laundry.
put in some
there.
capsules in there to make the water soft.
They're probably doing something to soften the water, or just to change the color of the water.
Yeah.
Does it taste like Clorox?
I was doing laundry there and a cockroach ran
It's
across
like
the
a-
I was like, what the? I just grabbed my stuff and I'm like, no more here.
Cockroaches, huh? My
Ew.
favorite flavor. Famous opiate addicts of the 19th century, Jane Addams. If you know Jane Addams, she was the one that opened the Hull House in Chicago. She was the first social worker, Jane Addams. Famous actress Sarah Bernhardt was an opium addict. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a famous poet, and she was an opium addict. Charlotte Bronte, of course, was one of the Bronte sisters. She wrote one of the books. There were each of them wrote a famous book, Wuthering Heights, and I can't think. Yeah, I can't think of the other one. Louisa May Alcott, of course, was an American authoress, and she's the subject of Little Women, of course. Samuel Coleridge, another poet. Charles Baudelaire, he was a French poet. Lord Byron was an English poet. John Keats, another English poet. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, we've already talked about his laudanum problems and his alcohol problems. He was the first science fiction and mystery writer in the world. Algernon Swinburne was, of course, another poet, English poet. Opium, morphine, and heroin became a health concern in the United States around the turn of the 20th century. We started thinking about it. 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed, limiting the manufacture and use of opiates. 1914, opiates became the first drug considered a narcotic in the Harrison Narcotics Act. 1924, heroin production was outlawed in the United States. So there's no reason to have it. And we haven't had it in the United States since 1924. So all heroin in the United States is illegal. Every bit of it. Okay. 1950, only 63 people incarcerated in federal prisons were incarcerated for narcotics violations. That was in 1915. 1928, 1 out of every 3 people were incarcerated because of narcotics violations. 2,529 prisoners. By 2004, 86.5% of the federally incarcerated prisoners had been convicted on drug offenses. That's 155,900 prisoners out of 180,328. Now there is an assumption out there that most of these people were arrested for marijuana, which isn't true at all. There are some in there for marijuana. So the idea was, if we legalize marijuana, look at all these people that will get out of prison free. But of course, there's a lot of these individuals are in there for crystal meth and for heroin and for cocaine, not just marijuana. There are some in there for marijuana, of course, but not a very large percentage. Because of the market for opiates, the United States criminal organizations sprung up to supply the demand. So how is the fentanyl getting in the United States? It's coming in through the Chinese triads. Oh, goody. Okay. The mafia, which we pretend doesn't exist, is an Italian organization. The French Connection is out of Marseille, France, and they smuggle drugs. The Mexican narcotraficantes, these are the guys that smuggle it across the border. These are the ones digging all the tunnels. What did they have? 27 tunnels in El Paso that they found, or they have found 27 tunnels. We have African traffickers. The African traffickers are mostly not in the United States. They're mostly in Europe, but they do come to the United States. One of the problems we've been having lately is the Russian mafia. Why have they become so prevalent? Well, under the Soviets, we didn't have to worry about these guys. They were Georgians, and they were in the southern portion of the Soviet Union. They were fairly free to do whatever the hell they wanted to do, but we didn't have to worry about them so much. But then all of a sudden, the Soviet Union collapsed. 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, and these guys took over the country. So a lot of the oligarchs that they're talking about, when they talk about the oligarchs, a lot of the oligarchs are these guys. They're the Russian mafia. And they moved into the United States because this was a very rich area. Americans like to use their drugs. They also moved into Europe. And they are the major drug suppliers in Europe. They're not the major drug suppliers in the United States, not yet. But they're also very, very powerful. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about when they talk about the potential collusion, is these guys. The question is, are these people just billionaires from Russia, or are these guys part of the Russian mafia? And of course, there may be a connection between Donald Trump and the Russian mafia. He gets his money from someplace, and it ain't in his pocket. So we're trying to figure that out. But this is one of the things nobody will talk about. And the reason they don't talk about it is because these guys are really, really powerful. And if you start talking about it, all of a sudden you have an automobile accident. And you die. It's just the way it works. Same way with the mafia. These guys just kill you. Colombian cartels, of course, the Colombian cartels control the country of Colombia, as sad as that is. At present, 4.6 million Americans use opiates, opioids illicitly every month. Only 136,000 to 800,000 of these individuals are heroin users. The biggest problem is prescription drugs, Vicodin and Percodan. 3.5 million people in the United States have tried heroin, as strange as that may seem. The rest are prescription drug abusers, mostly OxyContin and Vicodin or Percodan, which is another other name for oxycodone. Oh God! Well, let's mix this stuff up and give it to junior high kids. New wrinkle that is appearing in the Dallas area junior and high schools is a substance that they call cheese. It looks like Parmesan cheese. It's a mixture of Mexican brown heroin and over-the-counter medications containing antihistamines. The mixture gives an individual a bit of a rush. Several deaths have caused a nationwide scare, mainly because of the heroin. When somebody who is, 12 or 13 years old shoots up with this stuff, if there's a little bit too much heroin in it, then it kills them. And that's the problem that we've had. It's in the junior high schools, and that's kind of scary. Worldwide, 5 to 10 million people are regular heroin users. The United States only consumes about 3% of the heroin produced. Most of the heroin is utilized in Europe. The Europeans are big heroin users. You may remember Katy Perry. Once upon a time, she married a guy by the name of Russell Brand. Russell Brand was an English comedian, and he was funny. He was always so funny. Well, she divorced him after 2 years, and the reason she divorced him was because he was a heroin addict. There was an actor from Scotland by the name of Liam Neeson. You still see him on television. At one point, he had a bowel blockage. He had to have surgery. They had to cut him open and take this blockage out. Well, why in the world did he have a bowel blockage? What happened? Well, one of the things that happens when you use opiates is it slows down your bowels. And if you use too much of this stuff, and this is one of the really serious problems that individuals that are heroin addicts, it locks up their bowels. So lock it up to the point that they can't defecate. And they won't have a bowel movement for a week. Well, this happened to Liam Neeson, and of course he had to have surgery to take that bowel blockage out. Is he still a heroin addict? Well, probably not. You can't really live that long shooting up with heroin every day. But it's a very common problem in Europe. We were running into this problem when I was overseas. We were stationed in Germany. One of the problems that we had was about 1/3 of all the soldiers in Europe were using drugs, some kind of drugs. And some of them were using opiates. So one of my jobs, of course, was to collect drug urines on people. And they were coming back about one out of every 3 urines that I collected were coming back positive for something. And at the time, we couldn't test for marijuana. So they were coming back with amphetamines, barbiturates, or opiates. As serious as that is. So this is really kind of a serious problem. It can really devastate a military organization, as you can imagine. Now, where was all this heroin coming from? It was all coming up from Africa, and it was coming in from Russia, from South Russia, from Georgia. Now, if you were going to screw up the United States military and you're the enemy, would you try to supply them with heroin? Does that make sense? That's what we thought too. At the time, the Russians controlled Afghanistan. They had invaded Afghanistan in 1980. So they had all this heroin. What do they do with it? Burn it? No. They shipped some of it into Europe. And of course, we were having problems with it. Anyway, 92% of the world's heroin is produced in Afghanistan. There you go. And who was controlling it then? The Russians were, of course. I'm sorry, the Soviets were. Most of the world's legal opium for pharmaceuticals is grown in India. Most of the heroin coming into the United States comes up from Mexico. That's the best way to smuggle it across the border. Heroin, of course, you can cut it. It doesn't take very much of it to use. When people shoot up with heroin, they usually melt it in a spoon, in a teaspoon, and they cook it until it's liquid, and then they draw it up into a needle and shoot it into their veins. That doesn't take very much, as you can imagine. Medically, opioids are prescribed to deaden pain, to control coughing, or to stop diarrhea. And of course, diarrhea was a really serious problem around the world. It's #1 killer around the world for a really, really long time. But now we know how to slow it down. Now we can stop it. And how we stop it is by using Gatorade. The problem with an individual that has diarrhea is that their bowels are spasming. And so we need to stop the spasming. Well, either we can give them an opiate or opioid, or we can give them electrolytes. This is something that we discovered with Gatorade. So now if you drink Gatorade and clear water, you can probably stop the diarrhea in 1 or 2 doses. How about that? So if your little girl has diarrhea, give her Gatorade and see if it doesn't take care of it. It should stop in a couple hours. Diarrhea is one of those things that you don't realize how much fluid you're losing, but you're losing a ton. And you can dehydrate really, really fast. And that's the reason you need to give her not only the Gatorade, but also the clear water. Don't give her 7-Up or ginger ale or anything like that.
Pedialyte's really good.
I'm sorry?
Pedialyte.
Pedialyte would work. Yeah, Pedialyte works. We didn't know this.
It's expensive though, the brand.
Gatorade's cheaper.
It's like $7 for a bottle. It is. And it's like,
we didn't know this until somebody drank Gatorade who had diarrhea, and all of a sudden their diarrhea stopped. Doctors aren't real bright. They can't figure this stuff out on their own. Some mother figured it out. Non-medically, opioids are used to drown out emotional pain, to get a rush, to induce euphoria, to prevent withdrawal symptoms. There you go, the 2 biggies. Control coughing and stop diarrhea. Now the reality is that we have almost eradicated tuberculosis. Yay! Through INH therapy. INH therapy are 3 different types of antibiotics, and you have to take it for a year. So if you come down with tuberculosis, with an active case of tuberculosis, they will isolate you and they will make you take this stuff. After about 3 or 4 weeks, then you're no longer quarantined and you can go out in public. You're no longer contagious, but you're going to have to stay on the INH therapy for a year. Now the problem is, we've had this problem in the United States. One of the problems is that people coming down with tuberculosis, a lot of them are homeless, and a lot of them have mental illnesses. And of course, the mental illness may be paranoid schizophrenia. So we can't convince them to keep taking this medication, and that they will have. And so we have to lock these people up. Otherwise, we're going to be contaminating other individuals. So tuberculosis is not nearly the problem that it used to be. Whole villages used to have that stuff, and they would die. They would die from the tuberculosis. But now we can treat it. We have the antibiotics to treat it. And like I said, we've almost eradicated it. The biggest problem is that we have individuals that are coming down with it, and we can't force them. It's really difficult for us to force them to take their drugs. We're having the same problem with inoculation, children's inoculations. Some states have legalized, it used to be the law that you had to have your children inoculated. But now it's not in all states. One of those states is Washington, and they're the ones that are having the measles outbreak. Measles kill people. They used to kill thousands of children every year, and it's babies that it's killing. But you gotta inoculate your kids. But, of course, we changed the laws from time to time. Now we've got a measles problem. We thought we had eradicated it. We thought we had eradicated smallpox. We thought we had eradicated polio, but then there was an outbreak in one of the refugee camps up in Syria. Now we don't know what's going on. So the individuals that are taking the opiates are doing it so to get rid of their emotional pain, to get a rush, to induce euphoria, of course, and to prevent withdrawal symptoms from their drug. Now the reality is that the DTs, from alcohol, are far more severe than opioid withdrawals. People talk about, oh, they died of an opiate withdrawal. That doesn't happen. People dying from alcohol withdrawal, that does happen. It happens a lot more frequently. This is not that bad. Not as bad as alcohol withdrawals. Pain is transmitted to the central nervous system through the neurotransmitter substance P. The P stands for peptide. The more substance P that is released in the synaptic cleft, the greater the pain. The body modulates the intensity of pain by blocking substance P receptor sites with endogenous painkillers. So we have the ability to stop our own pain. And the endogenous painkillers are endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphin. Those are the three natural painkillers. The endogenous painkillers occupy the substance P receptors. These are the opioid receptors, referred to as mu receptors, kappa receptors, and delta receptors, and then a non-opioid sigma receptor. So they're all Greek letters. Exogenous opioids work because they occupy the opioid receptors acting as if they were endogenous painkillers, and that's why the pain goes away. What time is it? How are we doing? What, 10, what?
11.
10, 11?
Oh, 12 now.
10, 12?
No, 13.
13?
Yeah, this isn't here.
Jeez, I got a phone, I'll just look at my own damn.
No,
Endogenous,
watch. My watch is wrong.
10, 12. Endogenous painkillers are also activated when individuals feel anxious. It decreases anxiety, of course, produces a sense of detachment. It makes the individual feel drowsy. It deadens the unwanted emotions. Oh, unwanted emotions, okay. These effects occur because of the inhibiting effect of the endogenous or exogenous painkillers' effects on the locus coeruleus, the infamous locus coeruleus. This is the same area that causes ADHD. Opioids induce pleasurable feelings by slotting into receptor sites meant for endogenous painkillers, inhibiting the action of GABA. It triggers glutamate receptors, enhancing dopamine neurons in the reward reinforcement pathway. It increases the release and enhances the effect of dopamine. So it makes you feel euphoric. We've got that dopamine loop taking place. Reward reinforcement loop. The heroin has the strongest effect of all the opioids. And that's why people take heroin. That's why they've gone from synthetic painkillers to heroin. It's just a natural progression. The reward reinforcement pathway performs two functions. It signals pleasure so that an act is more likely to be repeated. It signals the alleviation of pain. Research has disclosed that relief of pain is a stronger incentive than the introduction of pleasure. So if you can make the pain go away. Now this is an old joke. People, why are you hitting yourself with a hammer? It feels so good when I stop. And the reality is that's true. It feels better to stop than it does for you to have pleasure. So potentially this has something to do with sadomasochistic individuals. They enjoy the pain. Why do they enjoy the pain so much? Because when it's gone, it is a far more euphoric feeling than just the pleasure itself. So they enjoy the pain. They literally enjoy the pain. They enjoy the absence of pain. Feels better than the pleasure they would get from something else. With psychoactive drugs, especially opiates, opioids, the desire to prevent withdrawal symptoms is a stronger incentive for continued use than the desire for pleasure. So you're trying to keep the withdrawal symptoms from hitting you. When an individual is prescribed opiates, opioids, a non-abuser will use the medication until the pain relief threshold is found. An abuser will use beyond the pain relief threshold, searching for an emotional high. Chronic users of opiates, opioids will use the drug in excess to prevent the withdrawal symptoms they are seeking to return to the normal state. And of course, that is a much better feeling. Opioid and opioid-like receptor sites have different functions. Mu and sigma receptors trigger the reward reinforcement pathway. It blocks pain transmission. It changes your mood. It causes pupil contraction. And this is how we can tell if somebody has overdosed on opiates or opioids. Their pupils, they have pinpoint pupils, which is a lot of fun. Just a ton of fun. Now we know what their problem is. They also can't see because their pupils are literally closed. And they can't see, they're blind. It depresses the autonomic nervous system, respiration and blood pressure. We can talk about crack whores. We can talk about individuals that have sex so that they can buy more crack. But that works because crack is something of an aphrodisiac. But a heroin whore is not possible. Remember, they're trying to stunt their emotions. They're slowing everything down. So this isn't going to work. You can't shoot up with heroin and then jump into an orgy. It just wouldn't work that way. But if you use crack or if you use cocaine, that could work. But it doesn't work as far as heroin is concerned. It depresses the autonomic nervous system, respiration and blood pressure. The kappa receptors induce dysphoria, induces endocrine changes. It controls pain at the spinal cord level. So the reality is that we see a lot of individuals who are meth users that will buy their drugs with sex, but these guys, it doesn't work that way. It's really tough for them to become prostitutes in order to buy their heroin. Opiates, opioids suppress coughs by blocking the activity of the cough center in the brainstem. Codeine and hydrocodone-based cough suppressants are still widely used. Robitussin AC and Hycodan syrup in Los Angeles. The hip hop scene, these guys were drinking Robitussin. They were drinking a whole bottle of Robitussin and going out and having and dancing the night away. As stupid as that is. We're going to find out that some people overdose on this stuff.
Doesn't it make you cough though?
No, it keeps you from coughing.
Oh.
You can't cough. It's a cough suppressant. It's got scopolamine for one thing. It's got scopolamine in it, but it also has codeine in it, and the codeine will keep you from coughing. People will abuse these substances for psychedelic effects. Unfortunately, an overdose of psychedelic substance, dextromethorphan, can cause respiratory suppression, nausea, and vomiting, and that's usually how they kill themselves. Overdose of cough suppressants is usually in combination with other depressants such as alcohol, benzodiazepines, and antidepressants. And this was a really serious problem for a while. These guys were chug-a-lugging bottles of Robitussin. They were drinking their tequila, and then they're going out and dancing, and then they were falling down dead. And the reason is, of course, for all of these reasons that you see. Dextromethorphan. They used to brag about Robitussin having dextromethorphan in it. They don't anymore. Because they've been sued by all these individuals. Let's see if I have time. And the answer is yes. Opiate opioids are also given to control diarrhea. Opiates opioids work on the brainstem to inhibit gastric secretions and depress the activity of the gastric muscles. Opioid addicts may suffer from severe constipation, and that's what happened with Liam Neeson. I like him too. I think he's a great actor.
damn it, he was a heroin addict and he constipated himself almost to death. As stupid as that sounds. Why don't we stop right here and we'll pick this up next time. And I'll try not to talk about constipation